Welcome to the AUA Focus Series, a podcast channeled by the AUA Media Lab. I'm Lara Setrakian, a longtime journalist, thrilled to be here today with Graham Smith, a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter and producer who's clocked in more than 20 years at NPR News and other places before that. He's a senior producer in NPR's investigations team and the co-host of the NPR serial podcast, Taking Cover. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Laura.
We are so happy you're in Armenia, and it is not your first time.
Not my first time. I was here 25 years ago for a couple of weeks teaching a journalism seminar, and it was terrific then, and it's great to be back.
Anything you remember? They called those, by the way, the cold and dark days for the lack of electricity and heating.
Yeah, sure. Well, I remember that a lot of the journalists who came in, who were radio people, some of them were coming from places that had previously really just had wire radio, really just had sort of one channel that you could turn off from the old Soviet days, turn off and turn on, and that was pretty much the choice you had. I mean, in a way, people still have just that choice of 500 channels of nothing sometimes, but it was great to talk with them, and people started going out with recorders into the field and finding all these stories, and everybody was really excited about it. It was a terrific time to be here.
And you're back now. You have so much to teach this environment. There's a lot of excitement around your visit, the masterclass you'll be giving on podcasting. I have a few masterclass style questions for you.
Okay.
Story choice. How do you know whether it's a news story or the long-form multi-episode stories? How do you know when there's a story you need to grab onto among all the other ones you could cover? This one's got to have the limelight.
Yeah. Well, I've worked on three, sort of big projects so far. And one of them was sort of why I ended up getting my job in the first place, because NPR hadn't done a serialized thing like this before. And I had a lot of experience doing long form work with independent producers. So these guys from Alabama came in with a story that they got their teeth into and didn't quite know how to bring home, about a civil rights worker who had been killed in Selma in the 60s. And they were kind of figuring out solving the crime.
So an unsolved murder story.
Yeah. So that was my first experience.
And how did you know that one had to be done?
Well, they actually came in with three different stories, and that was the one that the sort of team at NPR felt like had the most life in it at the moment. It can be hard. Once you start making long-form things, it can be like the person who's only got a hammer and everything looks like a nail. You can kind of imagine how a lot of different stories might stretch out into something long, but I guess you just get a gut feeling for whether there's enough complexity to it and enough to unpack that it makes sense to invest that kind of time and money into, getting to the bottom of it.
It must be somewhat intuitive for you. You've been doing this for so many years, but looking back, are there stories that you say, I am so glad we did that one? It made a huge difference in my world, and it would have been a shame to miss it.
Well, I mean, I think the things that we've done as part of the podcast have felt like that. One of them, for
Taking Cover?
No Compromise. This was a story that came out of, there was a consortium of stations that got some grant money to do work on guns in America. There was a series called Guns in America. Several stations. And these two reporters kind of noticed that they were seeing the same thing
in two
different parts of the country, which were these activists who were super far out gun rights activists who were very critical of the NRA, which is like an American gun rights organization. And we're operating in this sort of strange world of like Facebook Live videos. And once they talked to each other and realized they were seeing the same thing in the same place, it turned out that the same family was involved in this. And then as they got deeper and deeper into it, it turned out that it wasn't even really a story about gun rights, although that was where it was. It got much deeper into them coming from a deeply anti-government religious sort of place. Mm-hmm. So it's like when it gets so complicated that it's tough to describe it quickly, sometimes you get your teeth into something.
So journalists in different parts of the country noticing the same trend, realizing this is big.
Yeah.
Extreme right, dangerous. Yeah. We've got to explain what's going on.
Yeah. The other thing I think is Some stories you want to get documents for. I mean, you always want to get documentation, right? So you can file these things. In the U.S., we have a thing called FOIA, where it's a Freedom of Information Act. It's open government thing. It takes forever to get those documents. So if you're working on any normal story, even though you might file paperwork to try and get the documents, you'll probably put it on the air before you ever get those documents. So it's kind of wasted. But in these stories, we've been able to push them, get responses, appeal, get told, they don't have anything, and then sue the government basically to try to get the documents that you need and actually have the time to get them before you go to air with the story.
Classic investigative journalism.
Yeah.
I say this in the friendliest way possible. Okay. What changed because you did that story?
Well, that wasn't sort of a policy story. I think it was very revelatory for a lot of people. Both people who are, gun owners and like it, but hadn't really realized the shifting dynamics that were happening within their community. And also people who are sort of allergic to guns and the whole gun right thing and never wanted to hear any of that anyhow, got to hear where these folks are coming from. I think it also humanized them in a way that could both make you feel alienated from them, also understand where they're coming from a little bit. So I don't know what happened. That sort of came out just before the election. That was at the end of Trump's first time in office, but I'm not sure if there'll be a second one or not. With White Lies, they actually solved the crime. I mean, there was one guy left who was alive who was part of this group that murdered this minister, and they were able to get an interview and actually straighten it out. I mean, it's, I guess, setting the historical record straight. Wow. And that can feel good. And the one we've been working on most recently is about a friendly fire that happened in Iraq early in that war.
So an accident within the American military.
Yeah, and we've been able to get some information to people, but we've also heard from a lot of people who are currently serving in the military that this is sort of changing the way that they're approaching this training, changing the way that they're thinking about and how people should be informed. And we'll see. I mean, we'll see if it has a huge impact or not. Part of the podcasting thing, in addition to trying to get things changed, is to sort of engage people in a certain way, bring them a little deeper into whatever story you're working on. And I think it did that. I think people get a better understanding of the world.
I want to talk about that audience connection. But before we do, if we had a blackboard here at AUA right now, investigative journalism helps a society know itself better, helps a society explain different constituent groups to each other, helps solve a crime, et cetera, et cetera. What are the other things that you would say really are the punch as to why societies need investigative journalism?
Well, it sort of gets to your previous question, right? Is because it's also, some people will call it accountability reporting, right? It's holding people to account. It's getting deep enough into a subject that you can really challenge people on, a policy, a law, or just the way people are living their lives, and hopefully change it.
Audience connection. Is there something you do or think about to help an audience connect and even build up around a given podcast?
This is something we always try to figure out, who is the audience? For us, it's sort of generally the NPR audience, who's going to be a pretty plugged-in person anyhow, curious about the world. The podcasting is definitely different than, I was working on All Things Considered for many years, and you're doing sort of straight fact-based journalism. Podcasting is that as well, but I think when people listen to podcasts, they're coming to you for something more than that. They want to go on a journey, right? They want to spend some time there, and they want to have an experience in the course of this thing. And, for instance, we don't score our stories that are on the news programs, but you do score these podcasts because it is, I think, part of the unwritten contract with the listener that you're going to be engaging them emotionally as well as just, purely factually, which is a very different experience for me and has been a lot of fun to do sound design and to try and figure out how to make these stories cinematic in a way that can be affecting. And I think it does have more emotional punch, and I think people kind of sign up for that.
Do you, as a journalist, have to think about building the audience acquisition, as it's sometimes called?
Yeah, I mean, in that NPR tends to try to do a lot of cross-promotion. So we'll try to figure out which shows we might be able to do something with. For instance, when we put out Taking Cover, we did a drop in a weekend show that's got a huge audience. We did drop in both of the previous podcasts that I worked on because it has a true crime kind of feel to it. We did stories for Morning Edition and All Things Considered, which are the two big national news magazines. So you're sort of trying to figure out how to get the work that you've done into every possible channel that we have, including, digital stories that are written. Honestly, this is a bigger question, right? Because the kind of things that I've been working on, people don't know whether they should do that exactly like that anymore. Because if you're just offering something that only runs for 7 episodes, you're getting people to sign up. Now they're subscribers. And then what do you do with them? It's like you're leaving those listeners on the table. So instead, they're trying to figure out ways to create, there's a show called Embedded, which is long-form journalism from NPR. And so this thing was released both as an independent thing and put into the Embedded channel, and you're trying to figure out how to hold on to those people. And I think there's a debate about whether you try to build up an audience for each particular project you're working on, or do you try to do something in the stream of something else. I think you should do the individual things. Other people think you shouldn't, and it's probably some bean counters who need to figure that out.
Very powerful question in the age of digital journalism. Now, of course, NPR has a community. It has a beautiful community. But from that experience, do you have any advice for especially journalists in Armenia who are building one from scratch? What are the hallmarks of collecting a community around your journalism, around your channel, around your network? Because that's going to be the lifeblood of their impact and their sustainability.
Well, early on in podcasting, NPR had this massive advantage because we are audio storytellers, right? And this is this new audio medium, and we're completely geared up, and we can churn out some really good stuff at a time when nobody else really had the chops to do that. Now, everybody's got in. A lot of people have been hired away from NPR and are working for the Times or the Post or wherever. There's also a lot of garbage. I mean, there really are a lot of terrible, terrible podcasts. Probably, I don't mean that to put them down, but it's sort of like television or the internet or anywhere. I mean, people have a lot of different interests, and a lot of them are just, they want to hear about sports or talk about sex or have a celebrity interview another celebrity. And we're never going to be part of that, really. I mean, so we have to figure out what it is that we're doing and how we see ourselves being useful to society and sort of do our best work and hope that people cotton on to it. I mean, you do have to be strategic and try to push your message out, but you also have to hope that your audience finds you. So, I mean, if people were looking to how do you be successful in podcasting, I might just tell people you get a really great celebrity and have them interview some other people, and you'll probably get a huge audience and you can make some money out of it. But if you want to do what probably called you to journalism in the first place, then you kind of put your head down and try to do your very best work and make sure you're not being stupid and shooting yourself in the foot by not promoting it properly. But you kind of got to try to meet your audience where they are, put the stuff out into the world and tell people about it. I think you kind of throw your bread on the water and hope that it comes back to you or something.
Mm-hmm. Find the institutions that can promote
for sure. Absolutely. You make associations with other folks who are already kind of in that realm, who are with the audience that you want to have. I mean, there are tons of people in Armenia who are, I'm sure, very hungry for really good content. I mean, well produced, but also, at the highest levels of journalism. And when people can put that out there, I think they'll find an audience, I hope.
I want to talk about story verification.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the Freedom of Information Act, which, for viewers who don't know, is a law by which you can write to the U.S. government requesting certain documents, certain information that helps you find what you need for your story or perhaps back up something that you've heard over the course of your reporting. More generally, what's your sort of 1, 2, 3 standard operating procedure for verifying, for fact-checking the reporting that comes your way or that you dig up? And have there ever been occasions where you found it challenging, where there were some barriers to doing that, and how did you get around them?
Well, yeah. I mean, especially the last project we worked on, Taking Cover, is essentially all built around a covered-up incident, right? So by the very nature of it, the people who know about it are trying to keep it secret. So we had a tip that there had been a friendly fire where a Marine unit had accidentally dropped a mortar on some of their own men. Killed 3 people, badly wounded about a dozen more. and that it all been covered up because there was a politician's son who was involved in it. So then we just started trying to figure out even what incident they were talking about, going through open source stuff, looking through media reports, looking through books that were in a very famous battle around the Battle of Fallujah. And we started to get some names of people who we knew had been there and who we thought might have been privy to this incident that we thought was the right one. And so then we started doing interviews with people, asking lots of people. And then we went back to
you on the record?
Yeah, the guys who were the Marines in the field were pretty open to it. I mean, it took a little bit of trust building to get there, but they had always had questions about this incident and wanted to know what really happened. They had zero stake in keeping it secret. It was when you get higher up that people, who had been actually responsible for keeping it under wraps, were very cagey. And this is where we had to go after the documents. But I guess, you just try to chase it down as well as you can and run it by a bunch of people. And eventually we were able to get, very strong verification that it had actually happened. And although we never had somebody confess, like, yes, we covered it up, I think by the end of our reporting, it's very clear what went on.
And for the young student journalist, what's your advice for fact-checking? Double, triple sourcing? What's your sort of...
Oh, yeah. I mean, as far as regular fact-checking, it's absolutely essential to have, somebody besides yourself, hopefully, because you kind of convince yourself that everything's solid, to go through and say, like, how do we know this? How do we know that? Are you sure about this? I mean, even the spelling of people's names and pronunciation of people's names. We always try to have at least two sources. Sometimes there's something that one person knows and can prove that they can prove what they said because they've either got documents, they've got contemporaneous notes about it, or it's something that happened to them themselves and you have established a certain level of trust with them. I mean, that's all you have is your reputation, right? I mean, you have to be sure enough that this stuff is true and that you can trust it to pass on to your listeners, or else, you're not going to have a job anymore. I mean, that's all we really have.
We're almost at the end of our time, and there's so much more to ask you. But knowing who's listening, mm-hmm. I want to ask you to convince them to go into journalism despite the challenges, despite being in the age of so much noise and distrust of media. Why choose this profession now?
Well, I mean, I think I would have ended up here whether the prospects were that good or not. I've always been super nosy and I've always wanted to hold people to account, especially, I don't know, I've always been very skeptical about powerful institutions and people and wanted to sort of check and make sure that what they're saying is right. And figure out why they're doing certain things and why they're not. I guess if you're a very curious person who likes to talk to people, who likes to dig, and who likes to share, it's a great space for you. It's been incredibly interesting for me. I mean, I've been able to travel to a lot of parts of the world. Granted, I'm usually sent there when they're in total chaos. But it's very mind-expanding to go to a place that, you go to Afghanistan, a place where most Americans would be terrified to go and are very alienated from and probably have a lot of impressions about what the people are like there. And you go and you meet terrific people who put their lives on the line just to try to help you do your work, who will share with you, their meals, but also their lives. And it's fascinating to see how much we all have in common when we all like to think that somehow we're so different from one another. And to be the person who makes those connections for people back home who maybe don't have that opportunity. And if you actually pull it off, that they might be able to sort of like reach out and have a connection to this person that you met. And maybe they won't dehumanize them so much, and maybe they won't, send people to kill them.
It's a beautiful, beautiful craft. And I'm so happy we got to hear about it from you. Thank you, Graham, so much for joining us.
No, thank you.